Hello, my name is Townsend. This is the first in a series of interviews, discussions here at the Institute for Strategic Studies in Krakow, Poland. My guest today is Professor Gruszczak, and we are going to be discussing today the transatlantic security space in the era of Trump 2.0. So, if you wouldn't mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do, and your areas of expertise.
Okay, I'm a professor of social sciences and head of the Department of National Security at the Faculty of International and Political Studies of the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland. And basically my expertise is in security, international security, transatlantic relations, EU security, including border management, intelligence cooperation. These are the main fields of my expertise.
And as a little bit of promotional thing, what is the most recent thing that you've published?
Yeah, actually, the latest one is an article, G6 Group, which was an informal platform for cooperation between internal security authorities in the EU, mostly in law enforcement and border management. And it was somehow parallel to official institutional cooperation, which was unfolding in the Council of the EU and in some working groups. So that was like a revival of the regular, because it was shadowy, it was informal.
Of course.
So no much attention has been paid to this group.
And, I guess we can see it's good that we can see a revival of this group. So, shall we begin? So my first question is that we have, yet again, President Trump. He's returned to office. It does seem that he is implementing a much more aggressive foreign policy in comparison to his first term, which even his first term was an aggressive foreign policy. So, in your opinion, what is the biggest challenge facing Europe and the transatlantic alliance in relation to a second Trump presidency?
Yeah, comparing these two presidencies, Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0, there is a significant difference. I would say that the first Trump was more assertive than aggressive. Now it was somehow changing or just shifting this gravity from assertiveness towards aggressiveness. And one could ponder over the reasons and over the real roots of this change. I think that it is owing to the evolution of Donald Trump himself from president of the US, but being all the time businessman, and also an influential politician, especially for some alternative right wing of the American political stage. He was praised by alt-right, by QAnon, by National Rifle Association, etc. Right? So then it was this defeat in presidential election and contestation of the results and rebellion.
Yes, with January 6th.
Yeah, so exactly the riot of the Capitol Hill. And Donald Trump as a person behind this rebellious movement would not only just question the results of the election, but also undermine this sacrosanct principle of American democracy,
exactly.
The will of American people.
Exactly.
It was very dangerous, and we know that it ended in the courts and in felony. However, it didn't affect Donald Trump and his company or his supporters much.
No.
Yeah, even gave them a sort of boost towards radicalism.
Absolutely.
With some elements of extremism, including.
They support him even more now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important now because now Trump is again the president of the US. Yeah. And now he regained his formal competences and he has a real impact on American politics and global politics. And what is even more surprising, or if not shocking, that he started from very high level of his performance in politics, both domestically and internationally. And it doesn't bode well when it comes to the effect consequences.
Oh.
Of course, we can say it's only 1 month after his, 6 weeks after his inauguration. But well, still, it's like setting the stage, setting the scene, and putting things on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And for some people, it feels like the longest month in history. So coming back to Europe, what are the challenges facing Europe? And is Europe prepared to face this challenge? Are the Europeans prepared for whatever else is to come from Trump 2.0? I mean, we already see that they have, in essence, been flabbergasted by the speed of his decisions, but is Europe actually prepared for this moment? Can they meet the moment?
Of course, Europe is not prepared. Secondly, or just a follow-up, Europe is a challenge for the Europeans.
Sure.
And of course, the question is, what is Europe? Well, commonsensically, we see Europe as a community of democratic nations which belong to these two major institutions of cooperation, security, development, welfare, etc., namely the EU and NATO. But of course, nowadays, talking about Europe, it's, well, a part of NATO, but forced to live on their own because of Trump's strategy so far. Well, secondly, Europe has been in crisis for many years.
Yes.
And it was a crisis of political decision-making. It's a crisis of leadership, and it's a crisis of democracy. I mean, polarization of the political stage and trends towards extremisms, mostly in the right of political stage in Germany, France, in Austria, in the Netherlands, etc. So
Hungary being a classic example as well.
Yeah. Today, Croatian president was sworn for the second term, and this is another example, another case of radical conservative or even rightist head of the state. So the Europe is in trouble, and unfortunately, there is no real working plan or so the blueprint for getting away from this stalemate and this indecision regarding the key strategic points and issues.
So, in your view, what is one thing, one action that European politicians can take to begin the process of overcoming the multi-crisis, so to speak, of Europe?
Well, that's a question for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Of course.
The answer for this question deserves Nobel Peace Prize, or at least Charlemagne Prize or something like this. I would say that if such answer were somehow elaborated some time ago, we could have been now in a totally different place. This multi-crisis is because of the lack of determinacy, the lack of resources, the lack of political will to solve or to settle minor crises. It's like a snowball effect. Some local crises or some sectoral crises contribute to something bigger. And this bigger crisis is just getting out of control and is presenting a real challenge and real trouble for key decision makers. And the question is, who are the key decision makers?
Oh, that's also the million-dollar question.
Well, formally, they sit in Brussels and they are in the European Commission. Or they are sitting in their offices in the capitals. When it comes to intergovernmental cooperation and the European Council, the Council of the EU. And I have a feeling that, recently, during the von der Leyen Commission, there was a kind of tug of war between the Commission with high, ambitious goals and clear agenda, and some member states who were staunchly, sometimes refusely opposing this agenda. When it comes to Green Deal, when it comes to modernization, development, investment in alternative or renewable energy, and so on and so forth. And currently, I see again shift towards this intergovernmental cooperation, which makes the European Commission somehow auxiliary, at least in EU policies.
Okay, so in your view, we're moving slightly towards less Europe rather than more Europe.
Yes, I mean, less the European Union,
Yes.
more European interests. But the question is again, what's the European interest? How this category is interpreted in different capitals, especially the major states.
Okay. I'd like to shift the focus towards, so we've talked about the European Union, so let's talk about another pillar of transatlantic security, so the NATO alliance. What indications, we've had many indications of the US administration's approach to NATO, but I'd like to ask you to, for our listeners, to set the stage for us. What are the indications that we're getting about the administration's approach to NATO?
Well, there have been mixed signals said recently during the Munich Security Conference, but also in individual statements by top officials of the Trump administration. And, the picture of, let's say, US perspective of NATO is blurred. I can see any, say, substantial and unambiguous description of NATO's role, NATO's position vis-a-vis those conflicts and crises that are surrounding the North Atlantic area. Secondly, I'm afraid that Trump's administration is marginalizing NATO, or at least is going to consider NATO as yet another platform for US interest. So making some deals, especially in defense industry, in defense technologies, etc. So, buy more by American, and then NATO could be a sort of conglomerate or a sort of, European chaebol for security. But transatlantic security chaebol, with US as a CEO, or Trump as a CEO, maybe Hexet as a CEO of this conglomerate, with no specific things to be precisely expressed and put into motion.
I actually think that's a great comparison. Thinking of the alliance rather as shifting away from an alliance to a corporate structure, a conglomerate. I find that really interesting. So kind of go along with this metaphor, the different subsidiaries of the Trump Corporation, the different subsidiaries, they're being expected to spend even more on their defense and even more and less reliant on the superseding structure. Can we expect 5% of GDP to be the actual target?
No, I mean, it's a question of setting a sort of benchmark, right? I mean, it's a position high, actually unachievable for the majority of the allies, including the US. So it's more like pushing, mobilizing, just pinching a bit, shaming and blaming. Why you Germans spend so little on the defense and the European security or transatlantic security? Of course, a reaction on the part of these NATO subsidiaries is generally positive, in a way that there is a awareness of investing more in defense, in military infrastructure, in arms industry. But of course, this needs systemic transformation. It's not that easy to just make the shift from industrial production focused almost completely on the civilian goods or services and military-oriented kind of industry. Well, secondly, the question is how this 5% is going to be spent. And there are different categories of military spending. And actually, the weapons and military systems are minor category of expenses. More goes for people, for soldiers, officers, for their training, but also social welfare, etc. So that's a sort of incentive, but I wouldn't say that it's going to work and to give a sort of payback in a short time.
Okay, so this is more of an aspirational figure rather than a hard benchmark. But that also kind of contradicts with the statement of Trump during the campaign that any country that doesn't spend the supposed minimum amount cannot expect U.S. protection under Article 5 or under any other circumstance. Is this a threat to actually be taken seriously, or is this rather just the part of the negotiation strategy?
It's a part of Trump's transactionist approach to everything. I mean, the world is a global market, right? It's a big market, and security is just a commodity. So why not trading in this commodity or just getting some rewards or just enriching on that? I mean, America first. US companies, both from arms industry but also from civilian sector. So, yeah, I mean, it's a part of Trump's outlook on the global security and cooperation, but it also seems to be a feature of present administration. Okay. To take such an approach for every major security matter that is subject to US decision making. And if this transactionist approach is going to be taken seriously, so this means that the US is a trader in security as commodity, and either you are paying and you are buying our commodity, or you are exposed to some unpleasant circumstances and developments. So watch out, be careful, think twice. Maybe it's better to pay for that. No, and I have a feeling that many European governments or Canadian government or Danish government are somehow pushed towards this sort of attitude to this mercantilist policy of the Trump administration.
It seems a little bit like blackmail in a way.
In a way, yes, yeah. Well, however, to judge whether it is a blackmail or it is not, something should have happened, right? I mean, a test is needed. Right. I mean, and this is the worst case scenario, sort of nightmare for European countries, but maybe for the US itself in the context of Chinese policy. I mean, if NATO member states, one of the allies or more allies, are attacked or are victim of aggression, like Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia, then the question is, what's going to be a real response?
Right.
I'm a bit skeptical if Article 5 would work. I'm afraid it could not.
That's a terrifying thought.
No, I mean, we just used to live in this kind of certainty or assumption, it's a strong dogmatic assumption that Article 5 is a basis for security and is a sort of the Pact of Musketeers. Right? One for all.
Yeah.
No longer.
Yeah, but no more.
No, I mean, I wouldn't expect that the US would use full-fledged military capabilities if Russia attacked, say, Estonia or Lithuania.
So that actually leads to my next question. And I mean, we've alluded to this, but how much strain is Trump putting on the alliance? I mean, we can see these fractures already. Some people have already said that this is the end of the alliance. Is this the end?
There was a very nice old song by rock group R.E.M. with Michael Stipe as a frontman, and the title was "It's the End of the World as We Know It," and it is. Yeah. Well, actually, this Stipe was singing in continuation at "I Feel Fine," and actually, I'm not feeling fine with that. Because, yes, it's the end of the NATO as we used to know from its very beginning, from its establishment at the outset of Cold War. It's the end of the NATO that we saw in Afghanistan, following the first ever decision to activate Article 5. In some controversial circumstances, with objectives raising also some controversies. Why Afghanistan? Never mind. That's a question of mission and task for NATO. And I see a big discrepancy between Washington and Brussels, or between the Trump administration's general assessment and just an overall opinion about NATO and this European pillar of NATO. Well, I'm just reminding President Macron's famous comment on NATO in his interview for The Economist that NATO is brain dead. And there was a sort of scandal And well, the public opinion in Europe was thinking twice what Macron wanted to say to the global audience. And to my mind, it was like a red lamp blinking.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start to think about the future of European defense and European security with NATO either partially functional or even completely ineffective. And I'm afraid that now we have reached this moment that NATO maybe is not brain dead. This metaphor was not so...
Something was lost in translation,
exactly,
so to speak.
Yeah, probably. But, well, still, this question mark is really big.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's time to reflect on NATO and time to think about NATO without the EU constant presence, which is a real challenge and enormous task for European allies, mostly because the US is and probably will be a key force provider for the whole alliance, and the US won't be substituted just overnight. Yeah. These are long-term processes and they require a lot of investment in capabilities in this paradigm of military operations and so on and so forth. It's a very complex system of security and defense.
I'd like to shift focus now to another huge question mark that we have. So, as we are speaking, in Saudi Arabia, US and Russian officials are meeting to discuss peace or a ceasefire or whatever they plan to discuss. They're doing this in Saudi Arabia as we speak. It's controversial, as with many things happening in the administration are, but because neither Europe nor Ukraine is involved in these talks, do we have any signals of what the supposed deal might look like? What kind of form this might take?
Well, firstly, we've been suffering from deficit of reliable information, where these press releases or the official statements are very short and sometimes even meaningless.
Oftentimes conflicting even.
Yeah, even conflicting, exactly. Well, secondly, this is the first ever direct contact between US and Russian officials since the beginning of the war in Ukraine.
Right.
It is meaningful. It is telling a lot about the intents of the Trump administration and partly about Russia's objectives. But I wouldn't expect much from these talks in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
I would rather look forward to a very complicated game in diplomacy, but also in some direct contacts, bilateral, even multilateral undertakings among, well, the European countries, Europe and the US, and last but not least, of course, Ukraine. Because Ukraine finally is the key reference in this game. And characteristically and notably, President Zelensky said that he won't approve any deal above his head and above the Ukrainian nations.
Right.
And nothing strange. I would say that's a reasonable strategy or reasonable tactics in these conditions to confront this scenario, to take Ukraine as an object in this game,
right,
as a pawn in this chess game between two major powers.
Zelensky's, in a way, he's saying, I don't want to be another Czechoslovakia, as we saw during the Munich Agreement in 1938. And there's a lot of parallels there, and...
Well, actually, if I may, I'm not in favor of such historical analogies where the word has changed since then. Well, of course, history repeats as fast as usually has, but in 1938, the Third Reich was powerful and it was very determined to attack Poland and to construct a new order. Well, of course, now Russia is also seeking to revise the current order and to build a new order, but is much weaker and lacking considerable and tangible instruments to enforce new model or the new order for Europe. So, of course, there are some analogies, but they might be misleading when it comes to the real power of the players. And what is particularly surprising is that the Trump administration and Trump himself is somehow elevating Russia to this top level of global game. So it seems that Russia is going to play over her capabilities and potential.
Well, I mean, this is actually a very good point because, I mean, Russia, as we speak, is relying on North Korean troops to fill the ranks, and that does not seem like the play for a supposed great power. However, I would like to shift to another thing. So, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth stated that the pre-2014 borders of Ukraine are, quote, unrealistic. My question is, does he have a point, or is this just the administration either playing to the ego of Putin or just wishing to end the conflict on whatever terms, no matter the consequences for Ukraine?
I think that's, well, it's a characteristic trait for the Trump administration. I mean, to speak simple language and to formulate complex problems in well-rounded and straightforward message. And it's also, as I think Hegseth or J.D. Vance said, well, America is going to use a commonsensical approach to that. So let's see the things as they are. And, well, let's be realistic. Unfortunately for Ukraine, to be realistic means that no prospects for regaining these territories. I mean, this counteroffensive in the summer of 2023 ended in disaster, actually. It was the waste of potential soldiers, troops, and weapons, etc. So it is realistic. It is this Meschheimerian realism, very brutal, very Darwinian, I would say, but this is the state of affairs. But the problem is that in diplomacy, in a sort of bargaining, you are not just starting from this standpoint. If you have some trumps in your hand, then you are keeping for the final stage of the negotiations.
Right.
But on the other hand, well, U.S. diplomacy nowadays, I mean, the Department of State is a sort of strange, as a mix of different people, taken from different parts of America, with different CVs, with different experiences. And okay, Marco Rubio had to do with foreign affairs. He was in diplomacy. He might be considered as an experienced politician. And I'm not sure if he has some diplomatic talents, but he's more or less reliable as the Secretary of State.
The most normal of the administration picks, so to speak.
Yeah, so to speak. But if you take some ambassadors who were appointed in I don't know, NATO, for instance, right?
Right.
Or I don't know, special envoys who were, I don't know, real estate developers, people having those who were established in business, but not the diplomacy, not the big politics.
Right.
It doesn't augur well for effectiveness of this diplomatic process. Russian diplomacy is, especially under Lavrov, is very experienced. They are very professional. They are cynicist. And they, this is the Soviet old school of drawing as much and capitalizing as much as possible on counterparts in different negotiations. Of course, for Russia, the US is a tough player, apparently, but I'm not sure whether this, let's say, the strength and this determinacy will be shown and will be demonstrated in an effective and successful way. Successful for US interests and successful for Ukraine. If I may add the last point,
yes,
I have a
please.
feeling that this US strategy, I mean the Trump strategy, is to allow Russia to win this war against Ukraine and to make Ukraine feeling not losing this war.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a sort of kind of conundrum when it comes to juxtaposing these interests, motivations, rationale behind parties of the country, but also other states which are involved in this war in Ukraine.
It's very interesting. So they're trying to play the balance, like in essence, they're trying to play the balancing act of like letting Ukraine down softly, but
killing Ukraine softly.
Yeah, killing them softly. Oh, like the song.
Yeah.
Speaking of diplomacy, I wanted to pivot back to things a little bit closer to home. So Donald Trump, he's nominated. He hasn't been confirmed just yet, but he's nominated Thomas Rose as the next U.S. ambassador to Poland. So Rose comes from a media background, again, another businessman that we've seen time and time again from the administration. But an interesting thing is that he was also a very close advisor to former Vice President Mike Pence. So another interesting thing, among many other interesting things, is that he's seen as being very close to the now opposition party, Law and Justice, which would complicate things a little bit in diplomacy, one would think. But what impact do you anticipate his appointment to have on U.S.-Polish relations?
For Poland, it's a strong impact, mostly because of, as you said, sort of profile, new ambassador. While Thomas Rose seems to lack diplomatic experience,
right.
Even if he was close to Mike Pence, he's not a professional diplomat with some career in diplomatic service, but he's a typical servant of Trump administration, very loyal, right-wing political orientation, and evidently supporting conservative or rightist party in Poland.
Right.
Which now, with this tension between president and the government, and with the coming presidential elections, is a clear signal.
Yeah.
It's a sign who the U.S. administration, the Trump administration, is going to support. Of course, not directly.
Right. It's not as direct as Elon Musk speaking in support and endorsing alternative for Germany.
Exactly. Yeah, probably it won't be a kind of endorsement literally.
Right.
But many small signals and some movements that will definitely work in favor of Law and Justice and their candidate. Whereas, the political situation in Poland, in Ukraine, and globally in Europe needs fast and decisive steps, decisions, and some tangible outcomes of that. Especially after the recent visit by Secretary of Defense and coming visit of Special Envoy for Ukraine.
Well, so speaking about that, can we expect from Polish-U.S. relations, can we expect them to continue on their traditional, so to speak, traditional in the form of Donald Trump traditionally preferring bilateral relations rather than the multilateral relations, because he's made no secret of his disdain and almost hatred of the European Union. Is this government willing to participate more in these bilateral relations and sidestep, one could say, sidestep the European Union, or would they rather defer to the European Union?
Well, in this semester, when Poland is holding EU presidency, a presidency in the Council of the EU, the challenge is double.
Yeah.
Because firstly, Prime Minister Tusk and this civic coalition are not favorites of Donald Trump's administration. To the contrary, there's critical opinions that Tusk voiced several occasions, probably somehow, pinched Trump's ego and make him a little bit nervous.
Right.
Secondly, if Poland as a leader of the EU, at least formally, is going to play a visible and effective role in transatlantic relations, then it should have been started actually. Whereas, nothing on the horizon. It's silence.
Yeah.
There were some even critical voices that Tusk should have proposed a visit to the Washington, to go there as a leader of the country holding presidency. But I wouldn't see it probable.
Right.
Mostly because the Trump administration would be probably opposing that. And also, as you said, it's tending towards sidelining European Union and Europe from this global game. So this makes Polish politics complicated because current government, the Tusk government representing the EU, is somehow, getting into some other waters of European politics and also not helping Polish interests promoting or being promoted in Washington.
We should have another episode dedicated just to the Polish politics in the realm of the Polish presidency. That's going to be an idea for a future talk. However, I wanted to ask, is there an opportunity here, with all of this going on, is there an opportunity here for Europe to stand more united and further integrate and there be, quote unquote, more Europe? Or are the political headwinds simply just too strong against this ideal?
I'm overly pessimistic about making more Europe, about uniting Europe, or about provoking a sort of shock that would lead to a sort of new beginning, or just putting an end to this stalemate and the lack of decision-making capabilities, veto raised by individual member countries. I'm afraid it's unsurmountable. And moreover, it's usually all about the leadership. Who's going to take the lead? And who's going to take the burden of making Europe more secure and more autonomous? Well, apparently it's France, as used to be, willing, ready to take over its leadership. And even this project of European autonomy somehow echoing these ambitions of being not so dependent on the US.
Right.
Maybe not
classic French.
Classic French, de Gaulle's dream. Well, of course, even if it's not possible in realistic terms, then the very trend towards diminishing its dependence on the US is worldwide. I would say it's really a word of political, military, economic efforts. But the second question is, who's going to pay for that? Right. And well, Europe's not in such economic condition to spend substantially, significantly more above the current levels. So I would say for the majority of the countries, 2% is a real challenge. This benchmark is challenging, not 5% or 4%.
Okay. I just wanted to thank you so much, Professor, for this interview. And this is something that I would like to do with all of the interviews. I want to end this on a slightly lighter note. We've been talking about a lot of very heavy subjects. So, given everything going on in the world, what is something that you've learned recently that gives you hope?
Oh, a sort of a ray of light.
Exactly, exactly.
In this gloomy scenario. Well, I would say, for me, it's the end of hypocrisy in politics.
Okay.
I mean, this straightforwardness of Trump and his administration and his commonsensical attitude, it just strips many politicians, especially Europe, of this, round talk. And, well, Americans are not just beating around the bush. They are, using very simple, say, rationale, and they are driven by their interests. That's clear, but, it's like setting the scene and cleaning at the same time.
Right.
I mean, it's a black and white world, so no 50 shades of anything.
Right.
But do or die.
Okay.
And the question, of course, America first, but China, where? Russia,
Yeah.
Or where's the place for Russia?
Right.
Well, we are returning to this, say, big game, global game, this grand chessboard, and all these visions of returning to some basics in politics that will be painful, that will be brutal, that will be returned to Darwinian world. So welcome to the jungle. Yeah. We are predators, and you carnivores, just get out, or you will be devoured by us. And also, like entering cozy room in, say, Munich during the security conference, and you see such gentlemen as Immanuel Kant or Woodrow Wilson. And Americans say, gentlemen, your time is over.
Yeah.
Get out.
The time.
And you, gentlemen, Thomas Hobbes, come in. Niccolo Machiavelli, welcome.
So it's the rebirth of Machiavellianism.
It's the end of history, but in other terms that Fukuyama heralded in 1989.
The second end of history.
Maybe the hundredth in the history of the humanity, but it's an inflection point anyway.
Okay. Well, again, I'd like to thank you so much. And yeah.
Thank you for inviting me for this talk and for having me.
And thank you, listeners, for listening into our conversation. Again, this is the first in a series. Stay tuned for more episodes, for more discussions here at the Institute of Strategic Studies in Krakow, Poland.